In 1974, I made a discovery about Rembrandt's use of mirrors. He used mirrors much more frequently than just for his self-portraits. And in the course of making a little film about that, I became interested in other artists who might have done the same. And first I looked at Velázquez and then at Vermeer. And I was looking at this painting of Vermeer and I asked myself the simple question, how did he see himself in back view? And it didn't take genius to work out that he needed two mirrors, one obviously behind him and one on his easel. And when I experimented with that, I came to the conclusion that this was his main method for 90% of his paintings. And the amazing thing about Vermeer is that his technique of painting was very different, because although his subject matter looks the same as other Dutch painters, his actual enthusiasm and interest was in light. And he went to a lot of trouble to examine light out of focus, in focus, and to deal with the light coming from the subject rather than the subject itself. It's quite amazingly different. His whole approach to painting is so very different to other Dutch painters at the time. And the results are perfectly astonishingly precise and accurate. It's as if he set out to make a colour photograph, if you like, of exactly what light looks like. And other people think he used a Camera Obscura, and I don't argue with that. He certainly must have used a Camera Obscura to look at light out of focus, because as soon as you look at something, you focus on it. You have you can't avoid that. But in order to observe out of focus light, he had to look through a lens, and he did that. Other people have proven how he did that, and it's interesting and good. But I think the advantage of two mirrors, particularly two 17th century mirrors, which have silver backing rather than the modern mercury backing, is that silver turns black with time when exposed to air, to light. And a 17th century mirror, unless you looked after it very carefully, would lose a lot of light. And that sounds like a disadvantage, but in fact, the great problem for all painters is that light, if you hold up a light meter, has a spectrum, a huge spectrum like that, whereas the artist's palette has a spectrum like that, so to speak. It's just the difference between white paint and black paint is that in comparison with the difference between bright sunshine and gloom in a room. And so that ordinarily a painter just has to judge where on this small spectrum to put his tones, whereas I think that Vermeer was able to mix paint after it had bounced twice, that is, once there, once here. He could hold up the paint and match it with the light coming from the second mirror. This is a huge advantage. And how else does one explain mirrors or Vermeer's extraordinary ability to judge tone? Because he would put paint down and leave it, but it was nearly always so perfectly judged, he didn't have to muck about with it at all. Most painters guess and muck about with the paint on the canvas or scrape it off, mix it again and so on. Vermeer had this very exquisite technique because he could match pigment with light. Many years later, Stedman produced this book, Vermeer's Camera. It's extremely well researched and enormously painstaking in its experiments. And he sets out to prove that Vermeer used the camera. And up to a point, I believe him for the unfocused light. But as far as the whole image is concerned, the Camera Obscura, particularly 17th century Camera Obscura, wouldn't have begun to give Vermeer something that he could paint from. It just, the light coming through a 17th century lens simply is too dim. Even nowadays, somebody using a plate camera has to put a blanket over his head in order to be in the dark. Camera Obscura means dark room, so you've got to be in the dark in order to see the colour and tone. Well, it just isn't practical to put your head in a dark room and then come out. Your eyes take probably 5 minutes to adjust to the new level of light. There's a disadvantage that the image you see is not only upside down but the wrong way around. It's not impossible that Vermeer could have painted his pictures upside down and the wrong way around, but what Stedman agrees to is that in fact all the people who you can see in the paintings are holding things with their right hand, which is the normal way around, whereas somebody observed in a mirror is doing it the wrong way around. If you have two mirrors, of course it turns it back the right way around. In many, many of Vermeer's paintings you see the curtain that I referred to before, which would be covering the 17th century mirror. There are two paintings that Stedman can't explain because I can explain them perfectly well with two mirrors, and the Camera Obscura cannot explain them. The other objection to the whole idea of the Camera Obscura, A, it's not practical, and B, Vermeer would require a room which is 6.6 meters long. Now, Vermeer lived in a very ordinary Dutch house. He lived not only with his wife and 12 children, but with his mother-in-law and presumably a few servants as well. Can you imagine, in such a small space, the artist occupying a room which is almost as big as this, almost as long as this? It wouldn't have been this scale, but in winter, sitting very quietly and still, observing with enormous care in this freezing great hall. It just doesn't make sense at all. And so, although this is, it does prove that it is possible with a lot of complicated closing and opening of shutters and turning round of paper and so on, that it is conceivable that he used the Camera Obscura, but exceedingly unlikely. So this is the size of studio that Vermeer would have needed using two mirrors, and the size of mirror that he would need to paint with using the Camera Obscura is 6.6 meters, that is from here to there. An enormous studio considering his economic situation.
For more videos on art history by Nigel Konstam, see his website www.nigelkonstam.com, his Rembrandt research at www.saverembrandt.org.uk, where you can purchase his DVD, and find out more about studying with Nigel at his beautiful Verrocchio Art Centre in Tuscany, Italy at www.verrocchio.co.uk. Thank you for watching.